Welcome to another Legacy Warriors podcast where we break down the top two feeder leagues to the UFC and the Contender Series, where we cover Cage Warriors. And this week we're covering LFA 205, which goes down in Brazil and is headlined by an LFA bantamweight title fight between Vinicius Piriz and Lionel Abojer. Probably butchering both of their names, and I apologize for that, but still want to get the breakdown for you guys here. I believe we got 13 or 14 fights scheduled for this card. Decent card all around, some solid prospects and some solid snoozers as well. But again, the whole point of this is to break down all of these fights for you guys, let you guys know what to expect when these fighters step foot inside the cage. And if you guys want to take some of these and try to make some bets out of them, you're more than welcome to do so. Or you can check out the Lock of the Night Patreon page where I'll have tracked plays and official plays for all, or not every single matchup, but for the spots that I feel most confident in terms of pulling the trigger on. So make sure you guys check that out on the Lock of the Night Patreon page. And a quick plug for the MMA Fight Archive, where I was able to utilize that service to research up on all of these fighters, so I know exactly what to expect, like I said, when they step foot in the cage. And that's why I'm portraying this information to you guys. But if you don't trust my word, you're more than welcome to go out and check out the MMA Fight Archive and do the tape studying yourself and see what conclusions you're able to come to. There's a 7-day free trial available. We cover 20 different promotions from all over the world. We just surpassed 5,000 fighter profiles. So why not give it a whirl and see if it's worth your bang for your buck? 110 subscribers will definitely give their stamp of approval for the service as well. All right, let's not waste any more time. I'm going to briefly go over this card so we can get to the predictions as quickly as possible. So let's do it. First matchup up, Taveira coming in at minus 330, going up against Douglas Silva, who comes in at plus 255. Now Taveira trains out of the same gym as UFC flyweight, I believe, bantamweight, Gene Matsumoto. That's inside Muay Thai. Very solid gym there, good strikers, and that's exactly what you can expect out of Taveira. He actually has a fight earlier in his career against PFL standout Gabriel Braga. Obviously ended up coming up short in that matchup. Where he seems to struggle is in the grappling realm. When he can get into a groove with his striking, that's where he is most effective, and that's how he's been able to put together an 8-3 pro record. He goes up against a bit of an unknown here in a 4-2 Douglas Silva, whose 2 out of his 4 wins have come against the same fighter, so that's a little bit weird in my opinion. He is short, stocky, but has a very long reach. Very interested to see what the tell of the tape will say here now that he's actually fighting for a promotion that will provide that information. Not too much to really uncover about him. Seems to throw with a lot of heat. Doesn't really train out of a well-known gym. Seems, like a guy that will get run over by guys that are technically superior to him, and I feel like he's facing that here against Taveira. But again, there are a lot of question marks in Silva's game that's going to keep me from wanting to wager on this matchup, but I'm still going to take Taveira to win this fight, and I think he either outstrikes Douglas Silva to a decision or eventually finishes him late. All right, next up, Igor Taylon coming in at plus 110, going up against Wellington Mourao, who comes in at minus 140. Now, I originally came across Taylon when I was researching him 2 years ago when he was scheduled to go up against UFC signee Andre Lima, and that was a fight where I took the big underdog price on Taylon, and it was looking good in the early goings of the second round. But once Lima was able to shut down some of the submission attempts of Taylon, we saw Taylon break and eventually make way for a finish on the Lima side of things. Taylon comes from a karate background. It seems like he's obviously trying to improve his grappling game so he can be more effective there. Used to be a 125-pounder, now fighting at 135 pounds. Doesn't throw with a ton of power, but is obviously stinging with the shots that he lands. But it seems like he's very much focusing on the grappling aspect of his game to try to get victories and try to make it to the next level. He goes up against Wellington Mourao, who I was not so kind to when I broke down his fight back in February of 2023, where he went up against Marciano Ferreira. I largely called Mourao a can crusher. I really thought he was going to go out there and get smushed by Ferreira pretty quickly, but he showed solid resolve, solid resistance, and even had some glimpses of success of his own with the grappling and even some of his striking. He's an aggressive fighter that likes to try to submit opponents with his BJJ purple belt and often looks to keep that pace on his opponents. Obviously, he was unable to do that against a guy in Ferreira who threw with a ton of power and was easily able to dictate the pace. I think this is a great fight for Mourao to slowly break down Taylon, who seems to get demoralized when things really are not going his way, which leads to opponents ending up finishing him. And I think Mourao is going to be successful in terms of doing that. I think this will be competitive early, with Taylon probably trying to get to the grappling, but I think Mourao will shut that down and eventually apply the pressure with his striking and eventually break down Taylon and possibly get it finished by round 2. Next up, Eduardo Dutra coming in at minus 2,000 going up against Luis Carlos Dietrich, who comes in at plus 1,000. No need to get into this too much. Dutra, very solid fighter, BJJ black belt, 6-0 as an amateur, 4-0 as a pro. Dietrich, slightly below average in all mixed martial arts. Not really that great of a fighter. BJJ purple belt, minus 2,000. I would never advise parlaying, but I am going to pick Dutra to win this matchup, and I think he finds that submission within 2 rounds. Next up, Diego Paiva coming in at minus 205, going up against Giovanni de Oliveira, who comes in at plus 165. Now, Paiva is a BJJ black belt under the famous Damian Maia system, and he's been able to showcase his BJJ pretty well over his career. He took off 2 years of action before returning to MMA back in October, but it seemed like he was pretty busy with grappling competitions and staying in shape and sharpening those tools in his game. Through his first first 8 pro fights, he won 4-4. Then he managed to put together a 6-1 run, but he did end up taking off about 4 years away from action between 2017 and 2021. Now he's 2-1 since returning, with that one loss coming against a very solid Japanese prospect for the CFFC title, and Paiva was unable to get off on his grappling game, ultimately being out-grappled himself and finished in the 4th round of that fight. He did have some success, so I will give him some credit there. Giovanni de Oliveira is a BJJ brown belt who picked up a win back in November over a veteran who was 38 years old at the time. I believe de Oliveira likes to utilize his Muay Thai approach and try to break opponents down with forward pressure and his combination striking, but where we've seen him struggle in the past is exactly where Paiva is strongest at, and that's in the grappling realm. I think that Paiva will be able to engage in the grappling with his wrestling and eventually get de Oliveira to the ground and start working to a dominant position where he should be able to muster up a rear naked choke or a submission of any sort. I really like Paiva in this spot. The only thing that would put me over the edge in terms of even making him a lock of the night play would be if he was a little bit more active as of late. But given the stylistic clash here, I expect his grappling to prove fruitful, and that will allow him to snatch up the submission within a round and a half. Next up, Marcos Vinicius coming in at plus 135, going up against Nimias Santana, who comes in at minus 165. Now, Vinicius trains alongside UFC light heavyweight Bruno Lopez, and he makes his debut here with a 5-0-1 pro record. He seems to have a decent combination striking style and is also a BJJ purple belt, and I've seen him utilize all aspects of MMA to try to get his hand raised, whether it's grinding opponents out with heavy top pressure or walking them down and landing solid combinations. But I do have a qualm with his striking defense at times, which has put him in some bad spots. Most notably when he went to a draw against a fighter that he rematches this weekend, Santana, who was able to land big shots on him, and I thought Santana deserved to win that fight. The adversity that Santana faced was in the 2nd round, where he suffered a very nasty cut on his forehead that impaired his vision a little bit, and it ultimately went to a draw, which with scorecards that I don't really understand. It was 29-27 one way, 30-26 the other way, and then a 28-28 sprinkled in there. But I thought that it was clear that Santana was landing more damaging shots over the course of 15 minutes and deserved to win that matchup. Santana used to fight at 170 pounds, but looks pretty big for 185, so I'm glad he's up at middleweight now. And his first defeat came 7 years ago against a fighter that had 38 more pro fights than him. Absolutely crazy that fight was even even sanctioned to begin with. His last loss came in May 2022 by split decision in a fight that a lot of people, including myself, thought he deserved to get the win in, but it is what it is. He still has a respectable 6-2-1 pro record, and he has a very solid physicality and athleticism game that will allow him to really land some big shots on his opponents and put them away. I expect him to come through in this rematch here against Vinicius, as I think Santana can stop the takedown approach of Vinicius, and then once they're forced to strike with each other, I think the athleticism, speed, and power of Santana will be the difference maker, allowing him to land big enough shots to put Vinicius away within 2 rounds. Next up, Joao Pedro Moreira coming in at plus 130, going up against Gustavo Ribeiro, who comes in at minus 400. Now, starting off on the Moreira side, who's turned pro in mid-2022, he's put together a pretty respectable 6-1 record. The one loss came to an LFA prospect who is now 8-0, and he's a very aggressive fighter with how he tries to establish his game. All 6 of his wins have come in the first round, showcasing that he doesn't like wasting too much time. He wants to get in his opponent's face and either try to grind them out with his grappling and work to a dominant position to get the finish, or just walk them down and apply the pressure with his striking. He's also a training partner of the Bonfim brothers, so they're obviously sharpening his skills as best as they can to prepare him for this LFA debut. Again, the fighter that he lost against, Juan Pablo Vieira, is now 8-0. And is a solid LFA prospect as well. And that was a fight where Moreira almost finished him in the first round, but was unable to muster up enough shots to get the referee to step in, ultimately leaving him ripe for the picking in the second round for Vieira, who was ultimately able to get the finish there. Ribeiro, very solid prospect coming out of Tata Fight Team with a clean 5-0 record, comes into his LFA debut looking to add another finish to his record. 4 of his wins have come by finish, 2 of them by KO, 2 of them by submission, and he's very well rounded. He controls the tempo of fights very well, does a great job in terms of dragging fights to the mat and having success from that top position, and he has a great gas tank to go 15 minutes if he needs to. I love everything that Ribeiro brings to the table here, and I think this is going to be a very tough night for Moreira. If Moreira can't get off on his early finishing success within the first 2 to 3 minutes, I think he's very much going to struggle to put Ribeiro away. I think Ribeiro wears Moreira down and eventually finishes him in the second round, probably by TKO. But I don't mind that minus 400 line here on a fighter of Ribeiro's skill set. All right, next up, Giovanni Garcia coming in at minus 2,500, going up against Emerson Oliveira, who comes in at plus 1,400. Don't want to spend too much time on this. Garcia, BJJ black belt as of December, very nasty fighter all around, 8-0 as a pro, 6-0 as an amateur. This kid's nasty. He's nasty, and Emerson, borderline bum, if I'm being honest. He was scheduled to fight for Cage Warriors back in September, and he just no-showed the entire fight week and didn't even decide to get on the plane there. 8-6-1, no real skill set on the Oliveira side of things. I think Garcia can get this fight to the ground with relative ease. I think from there he'll eventually be able to find a submission. But again, minus 2,500, we can't be parlaying that stuff in a sport like mixed martial arts. All right, next up, Aristides Vinicius coming in at minus 105, going up against Luan Pedroso, who comes in at minus 125. Now, Vinicius was actually minus 170 yesterday when I researched this matchup, so to see the amount of love coming in on Pedroso is a little bit surprising. Vinicius was able to bounce back from a loss that snapped his 9-fight winning streak back in November, and he grinded out and out-grappled a very strong opponent over the course of 15 minutes. He was a little bit more competitive in the grappling realm, which eventually set up an arm triangle choke to get the finish in his last matchup. And it's clear that he prefers the grappling realm. He's a BJJ purple belt, and he's a little bit flashier in the striking realm with flashy kicks that he likes to throw. His opponent, Pedroso, is also flashy in the striking realm with how he tries to approach with his karate style. He landed a nasty spinning back kick in 30 seconds to win his LFA debut, putting his opponent away very quickly. He's a striker that likes to utilize a lot of mobile lateral movement, landing strikes from distance, landing his straight 1-2s down the pipe. But his grappling is kind of where he struggles, and I think that's where Vinicius might be able to get the better of him. Pedroso, again, very tough to really nail down and keep down, but I think Vinicius has a good enough grappling game to keep Pedroso in those defensive positions. As long as Vinicius doesn't get caught by anything unorthodox or too flashy, I expect him to win the majority of minutes in this matchup to grind out Pedroso and actually win this fight on the scorecards. I want to sit back, and I'm expecting Vinicius to eventually hit dog money here, and I'm going to end up pulling the trigger on him there. Otherwise, I'm fine with passing on this fight at pick'em odds, but I do like Vinicius here to utilize his grappling approach to pull off the upset. Our next up, Herbert Sousa coming in at minus 1,800, going up against short notice replacement Meiji Portela, who comes in at plus 900. Now, Sousa was scheduled to fight somebody else, and he pulled out a few days ago, but luckily they're able to lean on Portela here to come in and allow Sousa to get back into the LFA and try to even up his record with the promotion. The last time he fought for the LFA was in June of 2022, where he got knocked out by eventual UFC signee Muin Gafarov. Sousa was unable to get to his grappling game, where he holds a BJJ black belt, and obviously Gafarov, having the striking advantage, was able to put him away. Sousa normally does a great job in terms of dragging his opponents to the ground and finding submissions. With 12 of his wins coming by submission, it's obvious he looks to take fights to the ground and try to have success there. He's pretty strong. He's decent wrestling, although I don't know if it would cut it at the UFC level. But he's fighting a guy here in Portela who normally likes to utilize a striking approach. 4 of his 5 losses have come by finish, and I think that this is more of a spot for Sousa to kind of just stay active. Right? There's a reason Portela took this fight. I think he knows he's going to lose it. But again, minus 1,800 is not anything I'd be clamoring to parlay. But I think Sousa wins this fight. The spot that I would be looking to play is the under 1.5, which is currently around even money. I'm sure by the time you guys watch this, it'll probably take some heavy action, but I think Sousa submits Portela within a round here, and I think he makes it look pretty easy. Our next up, Xiomara Pires coming in at plus 475, going up against Gabriela Fujimoto, who comes in at minus 650. Now, Pires, having the nickname La Pitbull, is the perfect nickname for her style, considering how aggressive she normally fights. She throws and overextends on a lot of her punches, often falling over even when she throws kicks, but she wants to stay in her opponent's face and try to swarm them and try to make them quit. On the ground, she has a decent understanding of the jiu-jitsu game, but in the fights that we've seen her lose, we see how green and how raw she still is. She loves to fight. It's clear she's a fighter, but she's going to be very much up against it here against a much more technically skilled Fujimoto, who I have no doubt will be able to get this fight to the ground, especially with the strength and size advantage that she has. And I think from there, she'll be able to work to a dominant position to eventually find a finish over Pires. Again, it's tough to justify Fujimoto at minus 650, especially with the pressure that Pires will start to instigate, which is why I like the under 2.5 here. I think this is a spot that even if Pires lands big enough shots and gets Fujimoto out of there on the feet, that covers the under 2.5. But the spot that I actually expect to hit here is Fujimoto by submission. I think she is the far superior grappler, and I think she can dominate on the mat and eventually get to a position where she can get that submission or a TKO stoppage here. And I expect it to happen under 2.5 rounds. But yeah, give me Fujimoto and Fujimoto within a round and a half. Our next up, Diego Diaz coming in at minus 550, going up against Pedro Henrique, who comes in at plus 400. Now, Diaz really gives me Bruno Ferreira vibes just because of how much of a tank this guy is. He throws with absolute heat on the feet, but also has a very smothering grappling style where he can take opponents to the mat and just smash them from that top position. He's a BJJ black belt with an educated striking game, and even though he's as muscle-bound as he is, he seems to have a good enough gas tank to go 15 minutes if he needs to. His last matchup, he traveled to UAE for the UAE Warriors promotion and was able to submit a 23-3 Turkish fighter, constantly taking him to the ground and eventually locking up that submission. His opponent, Pedro Henrique, makes his LFA debut here, and he is now 1-1 after returning from over 3 years away from action. He looks to rely on his grappling more often than not, but the level of fighter he's been able to utilize it against and be successful with it is very low level. So once he faces resistance, we know that he very much struggles to deal with fighters that have a technical advantage over him. He used to be a 170 pounder, but now at 185 pounds, I think it's more so him just kind of accepting he's not going to make it to the next level. So why put himself through the suffering of having to cut weight and try to be competitive there? His striking is below average. His grappling is nothing special. He is a black belt. But I think this is the type of fight where we'll see the levels in jiu-jitsu, and I think Diaz will be able to smush him here and eventually finish him within a round and a half. All right, co-main event now between Manuel Sousa coming in at minus 740 going up against Lucas Barros, who comes in at plus 540. Now, Sousa is a guy that I've been wanting to see at the higher levels for a long time. He competed for the PFL for a couple fights, ended up losing his first professional fight against Archie Kogan back in September. Close fight, showcasing the defensive grappling improvements of Sousa, but ultimately it was Kogan who was able to pretty much control the majority of that fight. But Sousa is a very nasty striker who I'm very happy is finally in the LFA and has that path to eventually make it to the UFC, which is a promotion I feel he could at least hold on to a roster spot for, at least 8 to 10 fights. He stalks his opponents with solid striking, throws with big heat, big power, and like I said, his defensive grappling is improving enough so that it can finally get comfortable in the striking realm and start throwing with some heat there. His opponent, Lucas Barros, is a guy that I'm still reeling from the fact that I was unable to cash him as a plus 400 underdog when he took on Casio Jr. back in January of 2023. I thought that was a fight that Barros clearly won, but for some reason, there was a point taken away from him in the third round of that matchup, which I clearly missed upon watching it, and that ultimately forced that fight to go to a draw. Barros ended up sitting out for 20 months after that before returning for a different promotion and ended up getting the first round knockout. He's a BJJ black belt who has shown some stiffness in the striking in the past, but it seems like that's an aspect of his game that he worked during his time off, which led to that first round knockout victory that he had in his last matchup. He's still a tad robotic, tad stiff, and something that I think Sousa can completely take advantage of. Barros will obviously be looking to get this fight to the ground to utilize his BJJ black belt, but I think he'll struggle to do that against a guy in Sousa who has good enough takedown defense, good enough get-ups, and eventually a superior striking game which will break down Barros, and I think that will lead to Sousa getting a finish later on in this fight. The over 1.5 at even money is a little intriguing to me, as I think that the grappling attempts of Barros will force this fight over that 7.5 minute mark, but I think it's just a matter of time before Sousa starts to get comfortable, lets his shots go, and ends up finishing Barros in the later half of that second round or early third round. All right. That brings us to our bantamweight title fight headliner here between Vinicius Piriz, who comes in at minus 400, going up against Lionel Abojer, who comes in at plus 300. Now, Piriz is a fighter that I faded last time around with a plus 200 underdog, and it was looking pretty good for about 6 minutes before it seems like he started to slow down, and Piriz was able to take over and eventually set up the triangle choke to get the tap. Piriz is very active off his back with his BJJ black belt, often looking to set up reversals or submissions so that he can really start pushing the pace with his opponents. On the feet, he's very much improving the confidence in his striking, which is why we see him throwing with combinations and throwing with, 3, 4, 5 punch combinations to try to set up takedowns a little bit easier. There have been fights in the past where he just goes for takedowns, desperation takedowns, and that ultimately leads to him slowing down and making it harder for himself to end up getting his hand raised. But he is starting to string his game together very well, and I think he is a fighter that has the potential to make it to the UFC, and obviously getting the LFA bantamweight title wrapped around his waist would help his chances to make that jump. His opponent is an Argentinian fighter who notched his 5th straight victory last time around in June, where he was able to utilize his pace and pressure to break down Apollo Gomez to eventually club and sub him in the second round. He's very reckless, though. He just moves forward with a very unorthodox striking style, trying to throw with enough power to eventually set up a level change to get opponents to the ground where he can look for finishing moves, specifically that rear naked choke, which is how he's notched his last 6 victories. But he makes a lot of mistakes in the striking realm. He's a little bit too hittable, and I think he makes a lot of mistakes with his grappling as well that superior grapplers will be able to take advantage of. I still have some question marks in terms of how good his submission defense will be against higher levels of opponents and how his durability and chin will hold up, because he is a guy that's very hard to put away as well. I still end up leaning on the Pires side, but it's hard for me to get to that minus 400 line considering the unknowns and the aggressive style that Abojer brings to the table. I think Pires will eventually be able to club and sub Abojer, landing some big shots, eventually getting this fight to the ground and showcasing that he is the superior grappling specialist between the two guys here. The under 2.5, roughly around plus money, is calling my name because of how aggressive both of these guys normally are, which will obviously set up many finishing opportunities for either side. I still end up leaning on the Brazilian side of things here, as I think he's just a little bit technically smoother and slicker than the Argentinian fighter, which will lead to Pires eventually finding that submission and winning this LFA bantamweight title. There you guys go. LFA 205 breakdowns for you guys going down in Brazil. I believe it is a 4 p.m. Eastern start time on Friday, and they will be streaming every single fight as we have come to know whenever they go to Brazil. I believe the first handful of prelims are all going to be on YouTube, and I think the main card starts I think at 7 or 9 p.m. Eastern on Fight Pass. So make sure you guys tune in for all that good stuff. All right, make sure you guys check out the rest of the segments and stuff that I've dropped for UFC Mexico. On Friday is when I'll be dropping the Locky 2-Step / Locky Trinity parlay video, as well as the prop drop for UFC Mexico. All right, I'll see you guys again tomorrow. Good luck on all your action. See you guys then. Peace.